but we're excited to hear from you a little bit about the future and obviously your vision going forward, not only within NERC, but the UKRI and any other general points you wish to make. So thank you very much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Okay, so I really am sorry I can't be there with you in person. I would have loved to have been there rather than in London yet again, but it's a bit of a, I would say, pretty bonkers time, if you don't mind me saying that. I've been in this post about 6 months now, and it's incredibly busy. Not one, but 2 spending reviews is causing a lot of focus. So what I'll do in my sort of bit of time I've got with you is to just give you some oversight of what's going on government level, just from my mouth. So you've probably heard it from lots of other places, but I'll give you my perspective on that. And I'll talk about some of the things that are important from my context as to where this really critical area of research comes in to helping shape what's going on looking forward. So just a few comments on changes in government. You must have been asleep for a very long time if you haven't noticed that we've changed government. But I think from my perspective, probably the most important part of all those changes is the choice of science minister and the way that Patrick Vallance is really engaging directly with UKRI, but also importantly, directly engaging with the executive chairs of the research councils. Last month, he asked for a bespoke meeting just with the exec chairs without all the other parts of the system involved, and that was really, really helpful. He's trying to understand what the challenges and opportunities are, and that was before the submission for the spending review settlement. So I'm very positive about that, and I think it's very helpful that we've got somebody who has a really good understanding of science and is really batting for science in the big scheme of things. There are 2 bits that are really important to Patrick, but also for you and for me. One is around, he has a very strong focus around what he calls curiosity-driven research, to make sure we don't lose sight of that. I think that's really important because it means that we need to protect that really innovative thinking, the talent pipelines and the things that actually drive research and innovation, both within the UK and globally. So I think that focus on curiosity is really good. The second part of his focus, and this won't surprise you, is a focus on the 5 government missions. Just to remind you of them, it was quite funny. I was talking to institute directors the other week and they couldn't remember how many missions there were. So just in case, I'll go through the 5 of them very briefly. The one's kickstart economic growth. The second one is make Britain a clean energy superpower. The third's called Take Back Our Streets. The fourth is break down barriers to opportunity. And the fifth is build an NHS fit for the future. What's happened within UKRI is each exec chair has been pretty much mapped onto a particular mission area and also to close working with the relevant department and with the chief scientific advisor. So I'm mapped onto making Britain a clean energy superpower, close liaisons with DESNES, close working relationships with Paul Monks, who many of you I'm sure will know because he has interests in the areas close to all your hearts. Of course, he may be in the audience, I can't see him, but if he is there, fantastic. So I think those missions are important and I'll come back to them in a minute. The second component I think that's important is, which is really rising up the agenda and is very relevant for what you're doing with the clean air work, is the importance of place. So what we're anticipating is going to come out of the first spending review is a really clear offer and probably some dedicated resource aligned to place. There's likely to be a devolution white paper that's probably going to be announced at the budget. But I think that just continues the focus around regional growth that's really important. What I'm seeing there's likely to come out of that is quite a big focus around the combined authorities, around city deals, around empowering those MCAs to drive local growth and that's probably going to be aligned to a national industrial strategy. So what I saw in what you're covering and what you've been doing here is that where you've appointed, you're ahead of the curve. You know, your clean air regional champions, the way they're helping to join up local government, business, increase collaboration and impact. I think that's really, really helpful, really, really important. So good for you for thinking about that in advance, and also for, you know, I guess I'm saying make sure you keep that, maintain that. The place champion within UKRI is Jessica Corner of Research England, so it may well be worth a conversation with her if you haven't had one at some point to see how you can interface with that. So that's two things, you know, the missions and the place and the importance of Patrick. The other part around UKRI is, hopefully it won't have escaped your notice, that we've almost got a complete new swathe of executive chairs within UKRI. There is one exec chair still to be appointed, and that's the Innovate UK. What that's meant is very, very different ways of working. You've got a whole group of people coming in with fresh perspectives, a huge commitment to collaborative working, and a huge energy and excitement around making UKRI work. I find that very refreshing. And one of the best things we've done since I started is we actually have executive chairs only meetings very regularly for quite some time, where we actually focus on the science rather than all the operational stuff that can be a bit of the focus of being an executive chair and of a research council at the moment. So I think that's a huge positive. The other change that won't have escaped your notice is the recruitment of a new CEO for UKRI. If you're interested in applying for that, I think it's just open still, so you might want to reflect on that if you have huge ambitions to doing what will be a hugely challenging job. But Ottoline will remain in post until, I think, summer next year. So that's the process has started moving again. The next thing I wanted to focus on, just to give you some context, because this is where it starts to get a bit challenging, is around efforts around the spending review. That's what's been occupying a lot of my time and other exec chairs for quite some time now. So I think the first thing to say is that we are in a really different place to spending review 2021, when we knew broadly what the size of the budget for science would be, and where the sort of mantra was Britain as a science superpower. Those are not words that you will hear being used at the moment. In fact, we're almost being discouraged from using that sort of strapline. What that means is effectively what's happening with the spending reviews is we have a new department. DSIT is not very old yet. This is their first spending review submission. The focus has been very, very much on spending review 1. Really, what you should be looking or thinking about spending review 1 is very much as what's been called a sort of flat rollover. It's a horrible term, but you know, effectively a rollover rather than actually changing things. The bigger changes, the focus on longer term investments, will all come in spending review 2. That's likely to kick off almost immediately after the budget on the 30th of October. So there's no peace for the wicked in terms of making that work. Just to give you a bit of an insight, if you don't already know about UKRI's submission to DSIT, we actually submitted what we call flat capability, which was to say we needed at least the same funding as we had at the last spending review, but we also needed some additional funding to deal with many of the pressures that have come in, largely because of inflation. That was beaten back pretty quickly, pretty firmly, both by Patrick and the rest of DSIT. And it also met with some quite remarkable tuck-in requests from Treasury as to what else DSIT might and UKRI might cover. So what we're actually got to is the position is that the UKRI submission is pretty much a flat cash settlement. That'll be around, if it comes off, 8.9 billion. So that might look, and actually is, a pretty good outcome, but it is a material reduction from where we were in the last spending review. So whichever way you look at it, it's slightly or probably very disappointing, and it does lead to some funding deficits, which means that 25-26 will be will be quite difficult, and that will probably imply and push forward to 26-27. So we are looking at some challenging times ahead, simply because of the nature of that settlement. But in my mind, you have to look at this as really trying to turn a crisis into an opportunity. I think despite all those those financial constraints, to my mind, the ways of working across the research councils can only get better. Stephen sort of defined to me the sort of wicked problems that we can work on together, particularly that are important for your space around, healthy air, healthy water, healthy soils, building back biodiversity, creating healthy environments. There's everything to play for. And I think one of the things that will come out of this is much more joined up thinking, which is very much aligned with what you're doing, I think, as part of this programme. I just wanted to move on slightly and focus on what I see as some of the highlights from my perspective about the Clean Air programme as you are moving forward. It's really great to see this huge focus on multidisciplinary research. The reason I say that is it aligns so much with one of the other real positive areas across UKRI, which is the strategic themes, and I'll come on to that in a minute. That multidisciplinary research, the bringing together of atmospheric scientists, social scientists, healthcare professionals, etc., is really, really helpful. And I think it will give us that much more robust platform in which to deal with some of these challenges coming across. So we've spent quite a lot of time over the last few months as exec chairs really focusing on looking at these strategic themes and how we might actually develop them looking forward. I think your systems approach, your focus at this conference on new technologies and innovative policy and practice will be really, really helpful. So I look forward to hearing or getting some briefing on the outcomes of your couple of days working on this in a sense. So where I come in with this is I lead on the strategic priority called Building a Green Future. That is a really quite important priority in a strategic theme in a sense. It's probably the one that has leveraged most public and private investment into it. It started with a commitment of around 116 million for 5 years, of which there's at least another 90 million leverage into that. The sorts of focus, very much transdisciplinary. We've got a number of mission-led investments ranging from things like transforming land for net zero to nature and people, of which health is really important, and as is clean air, to accelerating green economy hubs, from which I hope a number of you have been involved. One of the particular areas, and again, I hope, a number of you have been involved in this, is the partnership with the National Institutes of Health Research, which is looking at sort of research hubs about how we manage the health co-benefits of the net zero transition. That seems to me really, really critical, and both capturing the indoor and outdoor health quality, air quality benefits that we need to see moving forward. If you're interested in what we're doing in that space further, please do watch out to some of the outcomes that will come out, I hope, of our Building a Green Future Congress next week, which is in London. We've invited Ed Miliband to come and speak at that. He hasn't yet turned us down. He probably will, but at least we've gone bold to see who will talk at that. Paul Monks is giving an opening keynote. We had hoped to get Chris Stark, who's the missions lead for Clean Power. I don't think he's going to be able to come because of other commitments, but I think that it shows the sort of level of focus there. In terms of that strategic theme, there are two areas where the focus is at the moment. One is that sort of quicker fix, and it might be useful for you to reflect on this about the implications of a very big drive around delivering clean power by 2030. That's within 6 years' time. So what are the implications and what are the added value you can give in terms of the needs for air quality in that sense? But probably where the major commitment would be in where we're going to be investing in the research and innovation around what's called the last 20%, that really difficult to deliver parts of the solution to actually decarbonisation towards net zero. So that really means us focusing on pulling together in two parts. One, not just focusing on mitigation, but also pulling in adaptation, and to make sure that both of those have some sort of positive effect, particularly from your perspective on reducing air pollution. And I think tackling air pollution as part of a conversation into the green transition would be something I'd be very keen to hear what your perspectives are. Likewise, your perspectives on clean air in a decarbonised world, understanding what you're doing in that space would be really, really helpful. And then the last thing I just want to focus on, Stephen's heard some of this at our council meeting last week, is what all councils are doing in a sense is to start thinking about how we sort of start our planning in terms of forward looks into the second spending review in a sense. So every council was asked at very short notice to put a pitch together really of what we might want to be focusing on in terms of the spending reviews. And that was really useful because it meant that each council could compare what other councils saw as their priorities. And that was really helpful in taking things forward. The three sort of priority areas that NERC put forward into that, and this is very, very early stages. There's loads of time to influence this. So if you don't like what I'm going to say in the next minute or so, don't worry, you'll be able to help and influence and change things. But one of the areas we were wanting to focus on is what I in code call beyond carbon. And by that, I mean that in a sense, our very strong focus on dealing with carbon as the solution to achieving net zero has meant a lot of unintended consequences, particularly for the environment, particularly in my sort of space, which is looking at land pollution and freshwater quality, but I'm sure it is impacted in your space as well. But so trying to look a bit more holistically, a whole systems approach to the green economy will be really important. So that's one area we're looking at. And some of the early discussions have been particularly with working with the finance community to help them understand how they can not only bring climate targets into their thinking, but also biodiversity targets as well. The second area, which is I think where healthy air really fits well, is ensuring the future of environmental security. It's very broad brush in that space, but I think that effectively what we're looking for is to bring in what are the things we need to do to make sure that we don't lose that resilience that we've started to build up, that we're more prepared for things such as geopolitical change, and we actually have a better alignment in terms of the sort of power projections I was just talking about in terms of building a green future. And then the last area, which is a bit more challenging in some senses, would be is what we're broadly calling responsible innovation at the frontiers of environmental science. Now, a few years ago, a council like NERC would not have gone near anything to do with geoengineering. Those of you who've been looking carefully at NERC's programs will see that there is a new call going out around solar radiation management. And that's really along the sense of that if we don't start to focus on trying to understand the implications through modelling and controlled monitoring within controlled environments, how are we going to understand the implications if somebody actually tries that at scale as we get closer and closer to those targets and people get more desperate to try and understand what to do? So that's quite a sort of innovative space. It's also the space where we want to really nurture the curiosity-driven research. It's really important, and to focus on some of the technologies and innovations that are really critical. And then the last area I want to focus in terms of that forward look is We can't do any of that without focusing on our capability. So the innovative infrastructures on which we depend, which NERC puts a lot of investment into in terms of long-term environmental monitoring, focuses on things like novel sensor technologies, and the associated large data sets and modelling that comes from that. That's really critical. Whatever happens, I don't think we'll be moving away from that investment because it's really critical. The second part is really important, which will be focusing on the talent pipeline and on people. I'm particularly keen on reigniting across NERC our appetite for entrepreneurial behaviour. I know it exists, but it doesn't seem to get to the top of the chain enough. So that sort of activity, much more focus on innovation and more focus on how we might be able to commercialise that activity.